Hey everybody, John Lorden here. Welcome to another episode of Itchy Mysteries for today, September 7th, 2017. Hope your week is going good so far. This one really surprised me. This might be, I'm sure it's a contender for my top 10 list that I do at the end of the year. Today I'm talking about a film called The 7-5, which stands for the 75th Precinct in East New York. In terms of documentaries, very few entertain me as much as this one did. And we're going to cover all that right after I give you guys the synopsis from IMDB. Meet the dirtiest cop in New York City history. In the 1980s, Michael Dowd patrolled the mean streets of one of the toughest precincts in Brooklyn. He also headed a ruthless criminal network that stole money and drugs, ultimately resulting in the city's biggest ever corruption scandal. I gotta tell you, this movie put me on a pretty interesting emotional curve. At first, you're introduced to Michael very soon, and you come to the conclusion very quickly that he is a corrupt police officer. It's something I struggle with because we know that it happens. We don't know how bad it is. And a lot of the mechanisms that he describes in this film give you a good reason to understand why we don't know how bad this type of corruption is. And that, yeah, there's internal affairs departments, but you know, the police are aware of those. And even in this case, they're doing their best to keep off of internal affairs radar with what they're doing, and they have some very interesting ways to do it. In one way, I think this documentary is very brave for bringing all this information forward. I mean, it was all information that was publicly released years and years ago, but to bring it back into the public's mindset is certainly a brave step. But I also wonder, is this information that's going to help corrupt officers now be smarter or better than the people that came before them? I really don't know. But I have to tell you guys, it is pretty rare that a documentary that I consider a true crime, this is certainly true, and it is about a type of crime. It is fast moving. There are really interesting characters that you meet in it. There's this underlying tale of people struggling with their ethics and their morals, flip-flopping back and forth, someone that seems to be good at manipulating others to bring them into this kind of dirty business of being a crooked cop. I was really interested in seeing the character of Michael as he's portrayed through this documentary, and seeing what a people person he was. Like, even when he's describing his relationships with other people, he goes into really interesting layers of understanding, almost like little toggles and switches, how those relationships work. But then he has this massive blind spot about his own character. It kind of boggles my mind that someone that is so smart about the character of others has this wicked blind spot about his own character. The music, first of all, I got to call out, the music caught my attention, but in a really good way. This is probably the best documentary that I've reviewed this year in terms of music right off the bat. Really good soundtrack, almost kind of reminded me a little bit of the Daft Punk soundtrack for the Tron Legacy movie that came out several years ago. Just kind of this neat techno little vibe that's going on under the story while it's being told to you. But they also did license some well-known tracks and drop those in throughout the movie as well. Really, really well done in terms of the soundtrack overall. The editing on this film is absolutely top-notch. To take what is essentially a bunch of talking head pieces, splice those up with some scene recreations, a little bit of media from back in the time, photographs, static photographs, but really amazing photography, and whip that all together into something that feels almost like an action movie while you're watching it. That is a skill that is amazing to me. Editor did a fantastic job on this. I think the director had a really good, solid vision of what they were going for with this piece, and I think they executed it very, very well. So all in all, you've got interesting characters, a super compelling story, and I have to tell you guys, I'm not the biggest fan of organized crime stories. I've never seen the Godfather trilogy. I've never watched Goodfellas. There's something about that type of content that really puts me off. I can't settle in with it and go through it. But this certainly is about organized crime. It does weave in characters from that world as well as these crooked cops that you're kind of going along this story with. And it brings them all together in this interesting kind of, you'd almost say family. There's this weird family dynamic between these criminals and these crooked cops and how they're all working together in a really interesting way. So the story is super compelling, twists and turns that you can't see coming. And despite the fact that I know the summary kind of talks about it being the biggest corruption scandal, that is just a minute little part of the overall story. They don't spend a ton of time going into the corruption scandal or the fallout from that, though admittedly a lot of footage is the result of that. It's Michael being interviewed through this process that happened kind of after he was busted. But it doesn't focus the story necessarily on the corruption. It really just adds it as a footnote to what happened to these cops at the end of their run of committing all these pretty insane crimes, and how did all of this work together. Really, really interesting stuff. As I mentioned, great soundtrack, really interesting still photo photography that's worked in with an excellent editing job. I can't recommend it enough, really. And luckily for us in the US, it's on Netflix. We can watch it. As long as you're a Netflix subscriber, you can check it out as soon as you're done with this video. And if you have an hour and 40 minutes or so to burn, I highly, highly recommend it. I can't see how this film could have been any better with the story that they're telling and the pieces that they had. They just did a fantastic job. If you don't have Netflix, it is available on other platforms for rent. It's not very cheap, but I gotta tell you, if I had to pay $5 or maybe even $10 to watch this, I would probably think it's worth it. I think that this is, it might even be worth a purchase. This is definitely a very different type of documentary. I don't know, guys. It really grabbed me right from the start, and it's almost like this roller coaster ride. I wanted to take a break in the middle of watching it so I could jump on the treadmill for a little bit, and I couldn't get away from it. I just had to see it all the way through to the end. Don't worry, I still got my run in after that, but it's really, really cool. It's a really strong piece, and I think there's a lot of lessons to be learned from seeing how Michael and his crew operated and understanding, is that kind of thing still feasible? Is it going on in our local police departments now? Are there any countermeasures that we could put into place to try to stop that from happening? And even just the more simple questions. What's it like to be a cop? Is there a bit of a, I don't want to say power trip, that kind of cheapens it, but once you're in a position of authority like that, do your ethics change? Do your morals get questioned heavily? Could you, perhaps, if you were in his shoes, have made some of those same decisions to, hey, grab a little money here, grab some drugs there, make sure that your family's being taken care of, take them on awesome vacations? It leaves you with some very interesting and tough questions about the structure of police in general and as people, which, of course, I think those make the best stories when you really take it down to that level. It ranks fairly high online, and for me personally, I have to give it a 9 out of 10. And I'm almost pushed to go a little higher. I'm just not sure if there's some other film out there that might be a little bit better, so I'm trying to leave myself a little breathing room. Like I said, pretty sure this is on my top 10 list for the year, but of course we have to wait to the end of the year till we get to that. But it is such a strong film. I don't have a lot of opinion on how it could have been better. There's nothing repetitive. There's nothing that seems slow. Fast moving, feels like an action film. I hope you guys see it. That's really, I guess that's the best endorsement I can give it. I hope you'll spend the time. If you're watching this, do yourself a favor, check it out. I don't think you're going to be disappointed. Thank you so much for joining me here on Itchy Mysteries. I appreciate each and every one of you out there. Hope you continue to have a great week. I'll see you back here tomorrow for a new episode of Brain Scratch on the Lord and Arts channel.